Hey, hey, hey. It's the best day of the week, Triple A Wednesday, which stands for Ask Alyssa Anything. This is my weekly Q&A session where I'm hearing directly from you about all the questions, concerns you have about navigating the book writing and publishing journey. I'm so grateful that all of you are comfortable sharing your stories with me, and I'm really happy that I can speak to some of your concerns more directly in this way. Just two quick pieces of housekeeping before we dive into today's questions. Number one, if you know that you're liking these sessions, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button. It really helps out my channel a lot. And if you're new here, welcome. Every week, in addition to these Q&As, I also do deeper dives into a specific writing technique or tactic, or I talk about the publishing industry as that's my professional background. So please consider subscribing so you don't miss out on all my next videos. Okay, let's dive into the first question today. Two questions for you on the topic of querying. First, if an agent gives a number of pages but no other specifications, should authors always assume 12-point Times New Roman double-spaced font? Yes. That's an easy one to answer to start. If the agent specifies a number of pages but doesn't say the formatting, the standard formatting for the publishing industry is 12-point font, double space. It doesn't necessarily have to be Times New Roman, but any standard font is fine. Let's get into the next question here. Second, I've heard a lot of horror stories about how agents rarely look at the slush pile. Is that true? Do agents really get almost all of their manuscripts by referral? There is a myth that pervades in the publishing industry that agents don't look at the slush pile, and you have to have a personal connection of some kind to get into their inbox and for them to consider representing you as a client. Every agent, of course, handles their queries differently, and it's possible that agents who are later stage in their career who already have a robust client list end up having less clients from the quote-unquote slush pile. But if the agent is open to queries, then that's because they want your queries and they are reviewing them. And I don't like the term slush pile because when I worked at an agency, it was actually my job to do the first round of review through the quote-unquote slush pile for the agents I worked with. But they didn't see it as a slush pile at all. They were happy and excited to receive their queries, and they did offer representation to clients who just sent them a standard query through their query channel without a referral. So if people are telling you there is no way to get a literary agent unless you have a referral, it's not true. Of course, a direct referral is only going to help you. That is true for any industry and basically anything in life. But if agents are open to queries, then it means that they are going to look at their slush pile in one way or another. It might be the case, as I just alluded to, that they have their assistant do a first pass through the slush pile just because of the sheer volume that agents have to get through. But rest assured that their assistant is trained in figuring out which queries would be a good match for the agent, and they know what to assess when they're looking through queries and evaluating manuscripts. So don't let horror stories about the slush pile deter you from querying. Here's the next question. This is probably a question that'll answer itself, but here goes. I'm a first-time author wrapping up my edits to my first draft. When querying out to agents, should I greet them and signature with my real name or my pen name? With my common sense tingling, I'm going to safely presume my real name. When you're querying agents, even if you intend to use a pen name, you should sign the email with your real legal name. That's because you are entering a business relationship with the agent, and they're going to need to know your real name, even if you intend to publish under a pen name. Here's the next question. Hi, Alyssa, months-long listener, first time asking a question. A debate, actually, between myself and another writer friend. When querying an agent, and said agent is requesting us to submit a bio, do we write the bio in first or third person perspective? I say first person, but my friend says third. In the query letter, your bio paragraph should be written in first person. That sounds the most natural because the query letter should, to some degree, sound like a letter to someone else. So you can safely use first person here, and that's what I would advise. Now, if there is a separate section in a query form of some kind, such as if the agent is using Query Manager and there's a blank field that says paste your author bio, in that case, I think it's fine to use first person or third person. But for the bio that is contained within your query letter, I would use first person because it sounds the most natural. That said, An agent isn't going to immediately reject your query because you used third person instead of first person. It's not that big of a deal. If you're enjoying my YouTube content, I have great news. There is so much more waiting for you on my newsletter website, chapter-break.com. I'm doing exclusive interviews with literary agents and best-selling authors and providing deep dives into specific editorial issues from my background as a developmental book editor. You'll get all of these resources delivered straight to your inbox. And as a freebie for just signing up to my newsletter, you'll get my story self-assessment worksheet. This is a quiz I designed to help you get unstuck with your current work in progress and see it more objectively. Identify what's working well and what you could improve on the next draft. The links to download your story self-assessment and check out my newsletter are in the description below. We have time for one more question today. Hi, Alyssa. I'm a fourth-year college student majoring in editing and publishing. I've been trying to work on my skills with developmental editing, since I find myself struggling to identify if a character or plot element should be cut from a story or if an author can realistically redesign things to make them work. Typically, these characters' plot elements aren't extraneous to the plot and otherwise are well established, but also don't quite cohere with everything else. Do you have any advice for how to handle those situations and any suggestions for resources that can help with honing developmental editing skills? When I'm editing a book and I come across a character or a plot element that just isn't working, I note it to myself and kind of bookmark it for me to return to after I'm done with the story, because sometimes things later in the story will illuminate what needs to be done with that character or plot element, right? So I don't want to jump the gun and give a specific recommendation on what to do until I've read the entire book. All of my edits are holistic in that way, and I do think that is the best way to approach developmental editing. You need to have a full picture of the entire story, right? So after I've read the entire manuscript, then I'll go back and look at those things that I flagged. Maybe a plot element that was mentioned in chapter 3, for instance. I'll turn back to the chapter or the scene in question and then think about what's going on here. If it just isn't contributing anything to the story and the entire rest of the plot would function just as fine without that thing that raised a question for me, I'll likely suggest to the author that we cut it, because it's clearly not holding its weight and it is just creating questions for the reader. But in some cases, maybe I will see what the author was trying to achieve with it. Maybe they were planting a breadcrumb for something that came later, but it just wasn't following through. So I'll try to think critically here about the function of this element. And if it could actually serve a purpose in the story, fleshing out a character's backstory, for instance, or developing a subplot, then I'll advise on what we need to do with it to make it justify its place on the page. Do we need to add a couple of lines to draw the reader's attention more to it at this point? Or do we need to maybe move that element to a different chapter, introduce it earlier, introduce it later on in the story? As you're developing as an editor, I would challenge you to ask yourself questions about why something isn't working. The first step is to see what is and isn't working, right? Then the next step is to figure out the why component. Then once you figure out the why component, you can go to the author and offer suggestions on how to strengthen that element of the story so that it improves the reading experience and contributes to the overarching narrative. As for resources to develop your skill set as an editor, my advice here is pretty similar to my advice for writers: reading and doing it. The more that you read, the more you offer feedback to authors, the better you are going to be as an editor. This is the type of skill that you really develop by doing over and over and over again. If you're trying to become an editor of a specific genre, then I recommend reading widely within that genre, so you can start to pick up on how authors successfully craft a story in that genre. Because then if you're editing a manuscript in that same genre, you're going to have a better framework for what an author should do to create a successful narrative. That's all we had time for today. If you have a question you'd like to ask me, drop it in the comments here and it will be added to my queue for my next session. Before you head out, don't forget my free story self-assessment worksheet and my newsletter links. Both are in the description below. And give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed today's session, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on all my next videos. Thank you so much for watching and happy writing.